Tonight, we're stepping into a kitchen that looks ordinary enough to disappear into memory. A pale morning light slips through thin curtains. The coffee pot mutters to itself. The radio is on low, soft brass, a weather report, a commercial that sounds like it's smiling. A woman stands in her stockings, one foot on the cool tile, and waits for the bathroom scale to settle on a number that feels like a verdict. This is not a sensational story. There are no secret laboratories under the house, no shadowy agents tapping the phone line. It's a story about something small, something you could hide in the palm of your hand. A pill. The kind you could take with a sip of coffee while the toast browned and the kids argued in the next room. In the 1960s, for a lot of women, especially mothers, weight was treated like a problem that should be solved quietly, efficiently, and without complaint. A problem you were supposed to fix before it spilled over into the rest of your life, before it showed up in a photograph, before it became the kind of thing someone felt licensed to talk about at a church picnic. And so the promise arrived in a little amber bottle with a clean white label. A promise that didn't ask you to rest or to eat better meals or to be gentler with yourself. A promise that asked for almost nothing. Just swallow and keep going. Now, before we go any further, a quick note. This is a historical story, not medical advice. People's bodies are different, and if you have questions about medications today, the safest place to take them is a qualified clinician you trust. Tonight, we're not telling anyone what to take or not to take. We're simply opening a drawer that history tried to close. Because that bottle, so ordinary it could sit next to aspirin and cough syrup, contained something powerful. In many cases, it contained a stimulant, an amphetamine, or something closely related. And that is where our forgotten diet pill lives. Not as a single brand name everyone remembers, but as an era of prescriptions that made speed feel like self-improvement. The language around it was gentle. Appetite control, energy, a little help. But the chemistry was not gentle. Picture the moment the pill dissolves, the coffee warms the throat, the stomach empties, and then, gradually, the day begins to change shape. Breakfast looks less interesting. Hunger becomes a distant rumor. The house seems easier to tackle. The laundry feels less heavy. The vacuum cleaner less annoying. The errands less endless. The mirror doesn't become kinder. Mirrors almost never do, but the anxiety around it softens for a while. And then you notice something else. Your hands are a little restless. Your thoughts are moving fast. You are speaking quicker than you mean to. You are cleaning the same counter twice because it somehow seems necessary. And when night comes, when the kids finally sleep and the dishes are stacked, you lie in bed in the dark and realize your body is tired, but your mind is still walking briskly in circles. In some homes, this became normal, not because women were careless, not because they were foolish, because the world they lived in was built to reward performance, not peace. Because the medical system, often with the best intentions, sometimes with profit in mind, handed out quick fixes like polite solutions. Because a mother was expected to be everything, thin, cheerful, competent, affectionate, and endlessly productive. And if you couldn't do all that naturally, well, there was a pill. So tonight, we're going to follow that pill. We'll look at how diet and slimming culture set the table for it. We'll meet the medical language that made it seem respectable. We'll talk about the stimulant age, how amphetamines moved from inhalers and wartime alertness into everyday American life. We'll sit inside the small, practical spaces where mothers lived, kitchens, waiting rooms, supermarket aisles, and we'll listen carefully to the cost. Not just the dramatic costs you can measure in headlines, but the quiet ones, the sleep that frays, the temper that shortens, the appetite that disappears, the heart that learns a faster rhythm, the sense of self that starts to depend on chemistry. If you like your stories slow, detailed, and a little eerie in their ordinary reality, turn the lights down, let the day fade, and step with me into a doctor's office that smells faintly of disinfectant and cigarette smoke. Because somewhere behind that door is a prescription pad, and on that pad is an answer the 1960s offered to mothers who wanted, desperately, to be smaller. To understand why a stimulant ended up in so many medicine cabinets, you have to understand what a problem looked like in the 1960s. It wasn't simply a number on a scale. It was a moral fog that drifted in through every glossy magazine page and every television commercial break. The post-war decades were full of new conveniences, frozen dinners, packaged snacks, supermarkets that felt like wonderlands of color. But they were also full of anxiety. Not the loud anxiety of sirens and explosions, but the quiet anxiety of appearances. A mother's body, in this cultural logic, was supposed to bounce back. Pregnancy was treated like a temporary inconvenience to the silhouette, not a transformation of a person. Weight gain wasn't framed as neutral biology or life's normal ebb and flow. It was framed as a failure to manage yourself. And here's the trick. The standard never held still. The early 1960s ideal was moving toward a thinner, younger look, an aesthetic that was often described as slim, trim, girlish, even when applied to grown women with children and mortgages and 1,000 small responsibilities. The marketing around food and the marketing around dieting formed a strange duet. One moment you were being sold rich desserts and creamy casseroles as proof of love and modernity. The next moment you were being sold calorie charts and appetite suppressants as proof of discipline. The message was, give your family comfort, but never let your own body show the evidence of it. And into that pressure came the physician's office, still a place of authority, still a place where many people believed that if a doctor wrote something down, it was not only safe, but almost inherently right. A diet pill in that setting didn't feel like street drugs, it felt like medicine. The mother didn't think of herself as someone who used speed. She thought of herself as someone who was trying to be responsible. And doctors, facing the same cultural beliefs and often trained in a more paternalistic era, sometimes responded to weight complaints the way they responded to many complaints, with a prescription. It's important to say this out loud. The women were not asking to become addicted. They were asking for relief from appetite, from shame, from social commentary, from that constant humming sense that their bodies were being graded. And the prescriptions had names that sounded ordinary. Sometimes it was a single stimulant, sometimes it was a blend, sometimes it was paired with advice that sounded like common sense but came with no real support. Eat less, walk more, try harder. You can imagine the appointment. A waiting room with old magazines, a receptionist who knows your name, a doctor who doesn't have much time, a polite conversation that never touches the deeper truth that you might be lonely, overwhelmed, tired, or depressed, and that food might be the one accessible comfort you're allowed. The doctor checks blood pressure quickly. He asks, "How much do you want to lose?" You answer with the number you've carried around like a secret. And then the pen moves. The sound of the pen is soft. The relief is loud. At the pharmacy, you're handed a bottle with tiny instructions. Take one in the morning, it says, maybe, and one at noon. It doesn't say, this may make your heart race. This may steal your sleep. This may make you feel for a while like you finally found the switch that makes you the person you're supposed to be. There's a reason the pill felt like a doorway. Hunger is distracting. Hunger is emotional. Hunger is complicated. If you can erase hunger, you can erase a lot of daily struggle. And for a few days, sometimes for weeks, the pill does what it promises. It flattens appetite. It sharpens attention. It makes the afternoon less heavy. It makes chores feel possible. It makes the mirror seem negotiable. To understand why a stimulant ended up in so many medicine cabinets, you have to understand what a problem looked like in the 1960s. It wasn't simply a number on a scale. It was a moral fog that drifted in through every glossy magazine page and every television commercial break. The post-war decades were full of new conveniences, frozen dinners, packaged snacks, supermarkets that felt like wonderlands of color. But they were also full of anxiety. Not the loud anxiety of sirens and explosions, but the quiet anxiety of appearances. A mother's body, in this cultural logic, was supposed to bounce back. Pregnancy was treated like a temporary inconvenience to the silhouette, not a transformation of a person. Weight gain wasn't framed as neutral biology or life's normal ebb and flow. It was framed as a failure to manage yourself. And here's the trick. The standard never held still. The early 1960s ideal was moving toward a thinner, younger look, an aesthetic that was often described as slim, trim, girlish, even when applied to grown women with children and mortgages and 1,000 small responsibilities. The marketing around food and the marketing around dieting formed a strange duet. One moment you were being sold rich desserts and creamy casseroles as proof of love and modernity. The next moment you were being sold calorie charts and appetite suppressants as proof of discipline. The message was, give your family comfort, but never let your own body show the evidence of it. And into that pressure came the physician's office, still a place of authority, still a place where many people believed that if a doctor wrote something down, it was not only safe, but almost inherently right. A diet pill in that setting didn't feel like street drugs, it felt like medicine. The mother didn't think of herself as someone who used speed. She thought of herself as someone who was trying to be responsible. And doctors, facing the same cultural beliefs and often trained in a more paternalistic era, sometimes responded to weight complaints the way they responded to many complaints, with a prescription. It's important to say this out loud. The women were not asking to become addicted. They were asking for relief from appetite, from shame, from social commentary, from that constant humming sense that their bodies were being graded. And the prescriptions had names that sounded ordinary. Sometimes it was a single stimulant, sometimes it was a blend, sometimes it was paired with advice that sounded like common sense but came with no real support. Eat less, walk more, try harder. You can imagine the appointment. A waiting room with old magazines, a receptionist who knows your name, a doctor who doesn't have much time, a polite conversation that never touches the deeper truth that you might be lonely, overwhelmed, tired, or depressed, and that food might be the one accessible comfort you're allowed. The doctor checks blood pressure quickly. He asks, "How much do you want to lose?" You answer with the number you've carried around like a secret. And then the pen moves. The sound of the pen is soft. The relief is loud. At the pharmacy, you're handed a bottle with tiny instructions. Take one in the morning, it says, maybe, and one at noon. It doesn't say, this may make your heart race. This may steal your sleep. This may make you feel for a while like you've finally found the switch that makes you the person you're supposed to be. There's a reason the pill felt like a doorway. Hunger is distracting. Hunger is emotional. Hunger is complicated. If you can erase hunger, you can erase a lot of daily struggle. And for a few days, sometimes for weeks, the pill does what it promises. It flattens appetite. It sharpens attention. It makes the afternoon less heavy. It makes chores feel possible. It makes the mirror seem negotiable.
In other words, it doesn't just shrink the body. It changes the experience of living inside the body. And that's the danger of any quick fix that works. When it works, You begin to imagine that the real you is the you on the medication, the calmer, smaller, more productive you. The you who doesn't snack, who doesn't sigh at 3 p.m., who doesn't need a moment to sit down. The pill doesn't just treat appetite, it treats your permission to exist. And once a culture ties your worth to thinness and your productivity to cheerfulness, it doesn't take much for a prescription to become a habit. So, what exactly was in those bottles? To answer that, we have to step backward, before the 1960s kitchens, before the dieting clubs, before the suburban scale rituals. Back to the moment a certain chemical began to slip into American life. A chemical first marketed as a kind of miracle for energy and mood. A chemical that would be used for work, for war, for studying, for staying awake, and eventually, for staying thin. Amphetamines didn't begin as diet pills. They began as a solution to fatigue, to mood, to breath, to modern life's endless demands. In the early 20th century, scientists were searching for compounds that could mimic certain natural effects in the body, wakefulness, focus, stimulation, without needing scarce plant sources. Amphetamine emerged from that world, and like many drugs, it traveled through different identities. At one point, amphetamine was sold in inhalers for congestion. A person could buy it for a stuffy nose, breathe it in, and feel a curious brightness arrive behind the eyes. Then the uses multiplied. Doctors prescribed stimulants for depression, for nervousness, for low energy, for problems that today we might understand as complex mixtures of biology, environment, stress, and mental health. During wartime, stimulants found a new role, keeping soldiers awake and alert. And when the war ended, the idea that a pill could push away exhaustion didn't vanish with the uniforms. It stayed. By the 1950s and 1960s, a culture of pharmacological help was well established. If you felt too sad, there was a pill. If you felt too tense, there was a pill. If you felt too tired, there was a pill. If you felt too hungry, there was a pill. The boundary between treatment and enhancement was not as sharp as we like to imagine. And importantly, these drugs were legal, prescribed, and promoted through medical channels. That legitimacy changes the psychology of use. If something comes from your doctor, you don't treat it like a risky experiment. You treat it as an instruction. When stimulants were prescribed for weight loss, it often came with a clinical framing, appetite suppression as a medical tool. Obesity had been increasingly medicalized, seen not only as a cosmetic concern, but as a health risk. That framing wasn't entirely wrong. Weight can correlate with health risks, but it was also used to justify prescribing powerful drugs for a problem that was, in many cases, being intensified by stress, advertising, sedentary life, and social pressure. And there were specific products and drug names circulating in that era, some long gone, some with echoes today. One of the most famous, phentermine, introduced in the late 1950s and widely used as an appetite suppressant. In modern terms, it belongs to a class of sympathomimetic amines, stimulant-like compounds that activate the body's fight or flight signals, reduce hunger, and can increase heart rate and blood pressure. Other stimulants used for obesity included forms of amphetamine itself. In some cases, the prescribing philosophy was blunt. Appetite is a switch. This drug turns it down. But bodies are not machines with a single dial. Appetite is tied to mood, to sleep, to hormones, to stress, to routine, to loneliness, to joy. And when you flatten appetite with a stimulant, you may also flatten rest. You may flatten patience. You may flatten the subtle signals that tell you when you're pushing too hard. For many mothers in the 1960s, the drug's early benefits were woven into everyday survival. A mother's day was long. The domestic ideal demanded a clean house, warm meals, children well-dressed, a smile ready at the door. Some women worked outside the home as well. Many were isolated in suburbs where adult conversation could be rare. A stimulant offered energy and appetite control in one motion. It offered a kind of chemical competence. But here's the thing about stimulants. They reward you for using them. At first. They feel like you've discovered a secret gear in your body. You feel fast, capable, optimistic, talkative, efficient. And that sensation can be so convincing that it blurs the line between medicine and identity. If your mother's day is measured in tasks, laundry, lunches, rides, errands, budgets, then a pill that makes tasks easier can feel like a moral improvement. Not a drug, a tool, a solution, a small, bright helper. In some communities, this wasn't a hidden habit. It was part of the social fabric. Women swapped tips about doctors who were helpful. They traded calorie charts. They compared pills the way people compare coffee brands. In some cases, the medical system encouraged it, treating weight loss as a reasonable short-term project, prescribing stimulants for weeks or months, sometimes longer, without fully recognizing how dependence could creep in. And dependence is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. You stop taking the pill and you feel tired, hungry, dull, slow. You feel like you've lost the edge you need to live your life. So you start again. And in that moment, the pill stops being something you use, it becomes something you require. To understand how this played out in real life, we need to look at the places that specialized in weight loss, places that turned prescribing into a kind of assembly line. Because in the 1960s and into the years that followed, weight loss medicine could become a business, and business likes a repeat customer.
Imagine a storefront with a bright sign promising transformation. Inside, the decor is plain, the chairs are vinyl, the air smells faintly of antiseptic and perfume. A few women sit with handbags in their laps, flipping through magazines that all seem to feature the same kind of body. The receptionist calls names with practiced politeness. This is not the image most people have when they think about drug culture. But for many, this is exactly where powerful stimulants moved through the world, quietly, politely, under fluorescent lights. By the 1960s, weight loss clinics and reducing programs were becoming more visible. Some were part of legitimate medical practices. Some were looser operations that treated weight loss like a commercial service. The model was simple. See a large number of patients quickly, collect fees, and provide medication that produced quick results. Quick results kept people coming back. A stimulant that suppressed appetite could show a change on the scale within days, and the scale was the clinic's best advertisement. The visit could be fast, a weigh-in, a few questions, maybe a blood pressure check, then a new prescription. The patient leaves with a bottle and a set of instructions. Take this, avoid sweets, drink water. The patient goes home and suddenly feels like she has momentum. If you've ever felt trapped in a cycle, dieting, losing, gaining, self-blame, you can understand why momentum feels like rescue. But momentum doesn't always mean stability. Stimulants create motion, sometimes whether you want it or not. They speed the heart, they narrow attention, they sharpen mood into a bright edge. They can make you feel as if your day has been plugged into an outlet. And the clinic's atmosphere, with its calm authority, could make that edge feel safe. There is also the social element. Weight loss communities can be supportive, but they can also become competitive without meaning to. Women compare progress. They talk about willpower. They talk about cheating. The pill becomes part of the language. How many milligrams, what time you take it, whether it still works. And when the pill stops working as dramatically, as tolerance grows, the conversation changes. Some people switch medications. Some ask for higher doses. Some combine substances, stimulants to keep going, sedatives to come down. That's not because people were reckless. It's because the body resists being pushed. If a stimulant keeps you awake, you eventually crave sleep. If it removes appetite, you eventually crave food. And if it creates a bright, productive mood, you eventually feel the contrast when that mood fades. In some medical settings, that contrast was addressed with more prescriptions. It was a pharmacological loop. In the 1960s, the loop could be especially seductive for mothers.
Motherhood, in its everyday form, is repetitive. It is constant. It is full of invisible labor. When you feel exhausted, the world often treats that exhaustion as a personal weakness rather than a logical response to a heavy load. A stimulant offered a way to look like you were thriving, to be the mother who makes lunch with a smile, the mother who keeps the house spotless, the mother who never seems to stop. And when people praised you, you look great, you have so much energy, how do you do it? The pill's role became even more hidden. Because praise doesn't come with warnings, it comes with encouragement. So the culture reinforced the habit, even when the habit had costs. In some areas, doctors were cautious and tried to keep stimulant prescriptions short. In other areas, stimulants were given more freely. And because prescriptions could come from multiple sources, one doctor, then another, the system could be porous. By the late 1960s, concerns about stimulant misuse were rising in the broader culture. But in many homes, the pill still had a respectable identity: diet medicine. Now, let's move away from the waiting room and into the body, because it's one thing to talk about policies and clinics. It's another to feel the drug arrive on a Tuesday morning when you've got grocery shopping to do and a child's project due and a sink full of dishes. What did it actually feel like? What did it change minute by minute?
Let's slow the camera down. It's a weekday morning. The children are moving through the house like small weather systems. Sudden storms, bursts of laughter, moments of silence that never last. You take the pill with coffee. At first, nothing. Then, a tightening in the chest that's not exactly painful but noticeable, like a small internal alert. Your thoughts begin to line up. The kitchen looks like a list of tasks, and the list seems manageable. Breakfast smells less tempting. You don't feel hungry, but more than that, you feel indifferent to hunger. Indifference is powerful. Hunger is noisy. Indifference is quiet. The hours pass. You clean, you fold, you drive. You speak quickly. You feel, for a while, like you're finally in control of your own appetite, your own moods, your own pace. The drug is not only suppressing hunger, it is suppressing friction. Your feelings become streamlined. If something bothers you, you brush it off. If something overwhelms you, you do it anyway. A stimulant can create the illusion that you've become a simpler person, a more efficient person, a person who has solved her own complexity. In the afternoon, you might feel a subtle rise, almost a second wind. You don't crave a snack, you don't slump, you keep moving. And because you keep moving, you get things done. That's the hook. Productivity is addictive without drugs. With drugs, it can feel like a superpower. But the body always keeps receipts. The mouth becomes dry. The jaw tightens. The heartbeat feels loud in the quiet moments. Sometimes there's a gentle euphoria, nothing dramatic, just a sense that everything is fine, even when nothing has changed. Sometimes there's irritability instead. Tiny noises feel sharp. Small delays feel insulting. You snap at a child and then feel guilty, and then try to overcompensate with sweetness. Late afternoon turns into evening. You make dinner, but you don't want it. You take a bite to be polite to your own routine. You watch the kids eat and feel almost proud that you're not tempted. But appetite suppression is not the same as nourishment. Your body still needs fuel, and when it doesn't get it, it borrows from elsewhere. Tiredness becomes hidden, then amplified. Mood becomes brittle. Sleep becomes strange. Night arrives. The house quiets. You finally sit down, and suddenly the drug's energy has nowhere to go. Your mind runs through lists, tomorrow's errands, next week's bills, whether you said the wrong thing to your neighbor, whether your husband looked annoyed at dinner, whether your jeans will fit better by Saturday. You try to sleep, your eyes close, but your thoughts don't. A stimulant doesn't always keep you visibly awake. Sometimes it keeps you internally awake, like a light in a back room.
You might drift for a while, then wake suddenly at 2 a.m. with your heart doing a small sprint. You might lie there, staring at the ceiling, feeling oddly alert, as if you should get up and scrub the bathtub. Some women did. Some women cleaned at night. Some paced. Some smoked cigarettes, another appetite suppressant, another stimulant, another way to control the body. And in the morning, the fatigue is waiting. But the pill is also waiting. And the pill offers a solution to the fatigue the pill created. This is how loops happen. Not with villainy, with routine, with relief, with the basic desire to feel okay. In the first weeks, the weight drops. Compliments arrive. The mirror looks less hostile. The doctor nods approvingly. You feel rewarded. Then, gradually, your body adapts. The same dose doesn't feel as strong. Your appetite begins to whisper again. You might feel heavier not in pounds, but in spirit. And that's when some people take more, or switch to another pill, or add a second pill, because the goal is still there, hovering like a demand. Be smaller, be better, be effortless. And the chemical has shown you that effortless is possible, at least for a while. So what happens when the body builds tolerance? What happens when the pill stops being a shortcut and becomes an expectation? That's where the story turns from help into something more complicated.
Tolerance is one of the most ordinary, most human things the body does. The body wants balance. If you push one system hard, speed up the nervous system, suppress appetite, flood the brain with stimulation, the body quietly adjusts. It tries to normalize the abnormal. So the pill that felt like a bright engine in the first week begins to feel like a smaller engine in the 6th week. The hunger creeps back, not like a roar, but like a faint soundtrack you notice again. The energy is still there, but it feels more like tension, and the mood shift is not always pleasant. Some people describe it as a kind of emotional narrowing, less joy, less softness, more urgency, more impatience. Others describe it as flatness when the drug wears off, a dull, heavy feeling that makes the world seem less interesting. The mind begins to associate the pill with being the real self. Without it, you feel slow, you feel hungry, you feel heavy, you feel like you're failing, so you take it again. Dependence doesn't always mean a dramatic craving or frantic behavior. Dependence can look like a mother who simply doesn't believe she can get through the day without that morning dose. It can look like the fear of stopping, because stopping can feel awful. When stimulant use is reduced or stopped after frequent use, people can experience fatigue, increased appetite, low mood, and sleepiness, symptoms that can easily be misinterpreted as personal weakness rather than the body recalibrating. So the user thinks, I'm not disciplined enough, I'm not strong enough. But it's chemistry. And then there's the social pressure. If you've lost weight and everyone has noticed, you may feel trapped by their noticing. You may feel like regaining weight would be a public confession. So the pill becomes part of maintaining an image. And images are hungry things. They always want more. There are also side effects that creep in slowly. A racing heart that you dismiss as anxiety, headaches you attribute to stress, a temper that becomes sharper around the edges, a sense that you're always slightly behind your own thoughts. Sometimes, if the stimulant dose is high enough or the person is sensitive enough, the effects can become more severe. Panic, paranoia, agitation, even hallucinations in extreme cases. But most of the time, the story is less cinematic. It's a mother who becomes a little less patient with her kids, a little more brittle, a little more tired under the brightness. And because the drug can suppress appetite so effectively, nutrition can suffer. Meals shrink, protein disappears, vitamins and minerals are not replaced. The body loses not only fat, but strength. Hair thins, skin changes.
The body becomes smaller, but not necessarily healthier. And yet, the scale might say success. The scale rarely tells the truth about the nervous system. It rarely tells the truth about the heart. It never tells the truth about sleep. As tolerance grows, some people chase the early feeling by increasing the dose if they can. Some doctors refuse, others comply. Some patients find another prescriber. And in that era, before today's electronic prescription monitoring, moving between doctors could be easier. Another pathway emerges in this moment: combination. If stimulants make you tense and sleepless, you look for something to soften that. If you've been chemically pushed up, you begin to desire a chemical down. And this is where some of the most unsettling diet pill stories live, not in a single drug, but in a cocktail. Because the 1960s didn't just sell speed, it sold balance through chemistry, up in the morning, down at night, a pharmacological rhythm imposed on a human life. In some cases, physicians prescribed stimulant sedative products designed to stimulate and calm in a single capsule, or a pair of prescriptions meant to be taken like a matched set. To modern ears, it sounds alarming. To people at the time, it could sound practical, like engineering, like control. And now we're getting close to the center of our forgotten pill. Not just a diet pill, but the era's belief that you could sculpt yourself with chemistry, turn hunger off, turn productivity on, then turn sleep back on again, like flipping switches. So let's talk about the combinations, the pills that came in different colors, the pills that promised to make you both energetic and composed, the pills that seemed, on paper, to solve the side effects of the very drug they contained.
Here's a strange truth about drug history. When a medication causes problems, the first solution is often another medication. If a stimulant makes you anxious, prescribe a tranquilizer. If it makes you sleepless, prescribe a sedative. If it makes you feel too up, add something that brings you down. In the 1960s, this logic could lead to combinations that today feel like a warning label waiting to happen. There were products that paired stimulant drugs with barbiturates, older sedatives that can strongly depress the central nervous system. One well-known example from mid-century prescribing was a combination of dextroamphetamine, a stimulant, with secobarbital, a barbiturate sedative, sold under brand names that signaled medical legitimacy. The idea was, in theory, to smooth the experience, give energy without anxiety, focus without agitation. But in practice, combining an up and a down can do something else entirely. It can create a cycle where the body learns to depend on both. You take the stimulant to function, you take the sedative to stop functioning. You become a person who is chemically directed from morning to night. And if you are a mother in a culture that expects constant competence, that chemical direction can feel like a lifeline. Because the alternative, being visibly tired, visibly hungry, visibly overwhelmed, feels like failure. It's also worth noticing how these combinations were framed. They were not marketed as dangerous experiments. They were marketed as modern medicine, calibrated, scientific, responsible. A capsule, a dosage, a clean label. Sometimes the pills themselves came in distinctive colors, which made them easy to recognize and easy to talk about. Color can become a kind of branding, and branding can make a drug feel familiar. People have described rainbow assortments of diet-related pills in different eras, bottles containing multiple colored tablets, each meant to do something different: suppress appetite, stimulate, calm, speed metabolism, manage water retention. Not every rainbow story belongs neatly to one year or one product, and the details can vary by clinic and by decade. But the underlying theme is consistent: the belief that the body could be managed with a set of chemical tools, one color at a time. Some of those tools were relatively mild,
Others were powerful and risky. In the 1960s, stimulants were among the most powerful tools, and they were also among the most normalized. A person might be taking a stimulant for weight loss and a sedative for sleep without thinking of herself as on drugs. She was on medicine. She was following instructions. This is one of the most important lessons of the era. Legality and legitimacy shape how we interpret risk. If the same chemical is bought in an alley, we call it dangerous. If it is handed over a pharmacy counter, we call it help. The body doesn't care what the label says. The body cares what the molecule does. So what did the molecule do? Stimulants activate the sympathetic nervous system, the system designed to prepare you for action. Heart rate can rise, blood vessels can constrict, blood pressure can increase. The brain's reward circuits can light up in ways that feel like confidence, drive, and clarity. For a person with certain vulnerabilities, heart conditions, anxiety, sleep disorders, these effects can be risky. For a person under intense stress, these effects can be destabilizing. And for a person who is already running on too little rest and too much responsibility, the stimulant can become a match near dry grass. Not always, not for everyone, but often enough to leave a trace in history. If you speak to people who lived through this era, you'll hear stories that sound familiar. My mom was always cleaning. She never sat down. She was thin, but she was sharp, snappy. She took pills from the doctor, and nobody thought it was weird. She couldn't sleep without something at night. She was anxious, but she didn't call it anxiety. In those stories, the medication becomes part of the family atmosphere. Not a secret addiction, but a quiet ingredient in the home's emotional weather. And the heart, the literal heart, often carries the strain silently. Which brings us to the cost that doesn't show up in a magazine ad, the cost that can't be covered up with lipstick or a new dress. Let's talk about what these pills could do inside the body over time, especially combined with stress, undereating, and the relentless pace of mid-century domestic life. Stimulants can feel clean because the effect is mental, more focus, less hunger, more energy. But the body is never only mental. The body is muscle and blood and rhythm. And stimulants, by design, touch rhythm. One of the most common physical effects is cardiovascular stimulation, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, a sense of the heart beating with extra purpose. For a young, healthy person, this might feel like a slightly faster engine. For a person with hidden vulnerabilities, or for a person who has been undereating, sleeping poorly, and living under chronic stress, it can be more serious. The 1960s didn't always talk about women's health in a way that took subtle symptoms seriously. A racing heart could be dismissed as nerves. Chest tightness could be dismissed as worry. Sleeplessness could be framed as overthinking, not as a drug effect. But your nervous system knows when it's being pushed. Sleep is one of the first things to suffer. Even if you fall asleep, stimulant-affected sleep can be shallow and fragmented. The body may not fully downshift. Dreams can become vivid. Waking can be sudden and anxious. And when sleep suffers, appetite regulation suffers too. Mood suffers. Patience suffers. The very qualities the pill was meant to improve, self-control, calm, productivity, begin to erode. Now add undereating. If your appetite is suppressed and you're proud of the suppression, you may not compensate with nutritious meals. You may skip breakfast, nibble at lunch, pretend dinner doesn't count because you only took a few bites. The body is resilient, but it has limits. Low intake can contribute to dizziness, weakness, irritability, and, over time, nutritional deficiencies. It can also amplify the stimulant's rough edges, making anxiety and heart pounding more likely. Some women reported feeling wired and tired, a state where the nervous system is alert, but the body feels depleted. It's a miserable state. And miserable states have solutions in a pill culture. So more pills appear, something for nerves, something for sleep, something for headaches, something for the stomach, something for the mood. The medicine cabinet becomes crowded, and the original goal, weight loss, gets tangled with a broader goal, just feeling normal. There's also the psychological cost. Stimulants can sharpen focus, but they can also sharpen self-criticism. They can make you hyper-aware of your body and your performance. They can make you restless in your own skin. Some people experience mood swings as the drug wears off, a bright morning followed by a gray afternoon, an energetic day followed by an irritable evening. And in a household, moods ripple. Children don't understand pharmacology. They understand tone. They understand tension. They understand when their mother is on edge. So the drug's effects become family effects. And all of this happens under a blanket of normalcy. Because if a doctor gave it to you, how could it be harmful? That assumption, doctor equals safe, is powerful. It's also incomplete. Medicine is a human system. Human systems make mistakes. Human systems are influenced by culture, by marketing, by the beliefs of the time. In the mid-century, there was enormous faith in pharmaceutical solutions. The modern world was built on invention. Why wouldn't the body also be improved by invention? And weight was framed as a problem of discipline, so a drug that made discipline easier felt like progress. Yet the body often responded with a quiet rebellion, tolerance, dependence, side effects, fatigue, sleep disruption, and eventually society began to notice. Not because it suddenly became kinder to women, but because stimulant use was becoming visible in broader ways, abuse, diversion, and a growing awareness that amphetamines were not simply benign helpers. Which leads us to a larger question. Why was thinness so valuable that we were willing to gamble with wakefulness and heart rhythm? What was the culture paying women to be, and what was it charging them? Let's step back from the pharmacy counter and look at the story's stage, the 1960s media world that sold a certain body as a passport to respect.
If you want to understand why stimulant diet pills spread so easily, look at the stories a culture tells about bodies. In the 1960s, thinness wasn't only aesthetic, it was moral. Advertising taught women that controlling their bodies proved their worth, that letting yourself go meant letting your family down, that a good wife was attractive, that an attractive mother was a better mother, that the body was a kind of resume. This wasn't always said directly, often it was said through implication. A smiling woman in a fitted dress holding a vacuum cleaner like a trophy. A kitchen so clean it looks unused. A husband arriving home to a wife who looks fresh, like she didn't spend the day working. A mother who never seems sweaty, tired, or hungry. The fantasy was exhausting because it denied the reality of being human. And when a fantasy is exhausting, people look for shortcuts. Dieting itself became a popular identity. Clubs, books, charts, slogans. Food was turned into virtue and vice. Calories became morality units. Hunger became something to conquer. And conquering hunger is exactly what stimulants offer. There's also a quieter cultural thread, the narrowing of women's lives. Not all women, not everywhere, but many. A woman might be educated and capable and still expected to find her primary meaning in the home. She might have few outlets for ambition that felt socially acceptable. In that environment, the body becomes a project. If you cannot control your circumstances, you control your waistline. If you cannot be praised for your work, you can be praised for your appearance. If you cannot be seen for your intelligence, you can be seen for your thinness. That doesn't mean women were vain. It means the culture offered certain types of recognition more readily than others. And recognition is a basic human need. So the pill, again, is not just chemistry. It is a cultural artifact. It is a small object that carries a big promise. I will help you become the person you're supposed to be.
And when you're told that who you are is not enough, when you're told you must be smaller, brighter, more cheerful, more effortless, then a pill that delivers effortless becomes tempting. The 1960s also saw the rise of a kind of polite medical consumerism. People trusted doctors, yes, but they also learned to ask for solutions. Patients came in with expectations shaped by advertising and gossip and magazine articles. Doctors were not immune to those influences. Pharmaceutical companies marketed directly to physicians, promoting new drugs and new indications. It's hard to overstate how confident the era could be about pills. This was the age of antibiotics that seemed miraculous, vaccines that changed childhood, tranquilizers that promised calm, and stimulants that promised energy. The world felt improvable. So when a mother said, "Doctor, I need to lose weight," the doctor's prescription pad felt like a modern answer, not a moral lecture, not a long conversation, not support with food, movement, stress, sleep, a tablet. But cultures don't stay perfectly confident forever. Eventually, problems became hard to ignore. People began to notice that stimulants weren't only being used in medical contexts, they were being misused, they were being sold, they were showing up in arrests, in dependence, in health crises. And the government began to respond. This part of our story has an official feel, regulations, schedules, hearings. But remember, behind every regulation is a pile of human stories, mothers who couldn't sleep, people who couldn't stop, hearts that beat too hard, days that ran too fast. So let's talk about the moment the culture began to turn its head and say, maybe this isn't just help, maybe this is a problem. By the late 1960s, the United States was paying attention to drugs in a new way. The era's anxieties weren't only about diet pills. They were about youth culture, psychedelics, heroin, and the broader social transformations of the time. But stimulants were part of the landscape. Amphetamines had been prescribed widely for years, and that wide availability meant they could be diverted and misused. The line between medical and non-medical use was not always clear. As concern grew, regulation followed. In 1970, the United States passed the Controlled Substances Act, which created schedules for drugs based on their accepted medical use and their potential for abuse and dependence. Under this system, amphetamine and many related stimulants were placed under strict control, Schedule 2, reflecting recognized medical use but high potential for abuse. That legal shift didn't erase stimulants from medicine, but it did change the cultural atmosphere. It tightened prescribing. It increased scrutiny. It signaled officially that these were not harmless helpers. At the same time, medical guidance around obesity medications evolved. Stimulants would increasingly be framed as short-term adjuncts rather than long-term solutions, and the emphasis, at least on paper, shifted toward caution. But policy changes don't instantly rewrite daily life. In many places, diet pills continued to circulate. Old habits have momentum. And for people who had come to rely on stimulants for appetite suppression and energy, the tightening of supply could create new problems: withdrawal, desperate searching, switching to other substances, or simply struggling through the return of hunger and fatigue. This is where the historical record becomes a mix of official and personal. Officially, the country acknowledged risk. Personally, many women still carried their routines. Some stopped, some couldn't, some didn't want to. And the culture didn't stop demanding thinness just because a law changed. If anything, weight anxiety continued and intensified through later decades, finding new products, new diets, new drugs. So the regulatory story is not a neat ending, it's a pivot from one era of pharmacological optimism to another era of more complicated, more regulated, but still persistent appetite control. And in the years after, the weight loss marketplace adapted. New medications appeared. New clinics promised safe solutions. The same old promise wore new clothes. Which brings us to the afterlife of the 1960s diet pill. What happened when the stimulant era became more controlled? What replaced it? And what echoes of that era still linger in how we talk about bodies today?
Once you see the pattern, it becomes hard to unsee. A culture demands thinness. A drug offers a shortcut. The shortcut creates problems. Regulation tightens. A new shortcut appears. After stimulant diet pills became more tightly controlled, the appetite suppression dream did not die. It simply shifted. Some medications with different mechanisms gained popularity in later decades. Some were removed from the market after safety concerns. Some were repackaged. Some returned in new forms. But the deeper engine, the pressure, kept running. Because the pressure was never purely medical. It was social. It was economic. It was gendered. It was built into advertising, entertainment, and everyday conversation. The mother in the 1960s kitchen was not only responding to her own appetite, she was responding to 1,000 small messages that told her her body was public property. And those messages did not vanish. If anything, later decades multiplied them. More media, more images, more before and after stories, more miracle language. In that sense, the forgotten diet pill is less like a relic and more like an ancestor of every quick-fix ad that promises you can become a better version of yourself without addressing why you feel unworthy in the first place. But let's stay with our original era for a moment. Imagine a woman who has been on stimulant diet pills for months or years. Now the prescriptions are harder to get. The doctor is more cautious. The clinic has changed policies. What does she do? Some women turn to other methods, strict diets, smoking, exercise routines that bordered on compulsion. Some regained weight and felt shame, not relief. Some found other medications, tranquilizers, sleeping pills, because the stimulant had disrupted sleep and mood so thoroughly that stopping it did not restore balance quickly. And some, quietly, returned to the stimulant through less legitimate channels. This is what happens when a drug becomes entwined with identity, when the drug is not only suppressing appetite, but also suppressing despair. When it becomes part of how you perform your role in the world. It's easy to judge from a distance, but judgment misses the human math. People choose what helps them survive, and in a society that didn't always offer mothers rest, community, or honest conversations about mental health, a pill could become the most accessible form of support. This is also where we can gently shift from history into reflection. Because if we treat the 1960s as a bizarre anomaly, we miss the lesson. The lesson is not those people were naive. The lesson is we are always tempted by solutions that match our pressures. If the pressure is productivity, we seek stimulants. If the pressure is calmness, we seek tranquilizers. If the pressure is thinness, we seek appetite suppressants. The drug is not the only story. The pressure is the story. So what do we do with this knowledge? We don't use it to mock the past. We use it to become more cautious in the present. We ask, what are we being sold? What are we being promised? What parts of ourselves are being treated as problems that require fixing? And we remember the mothers in those kitchens, not as villains, not as fools, but as people living inside a system that asked too much and offered pills instead of compassion. Now we're nearing the end of our night. Let's return to that quiet morning scene, and let's leave with something gentle, not fear, but clarity.
a way of seeing the past that helps us be kinder to ourselves and more skeptical of miracles.
The kitchen is quiet again. The coffee is cold now. The radio has been turned off. The day has moved on, and the small amber bottle sits in the medicine cabinet like a tiny time capsule. The forgotten diet pill moms took in the 1960s is not forgotten because it was rare. It's forgotten because it was normal. It was so normal that it blended into routine. It was so normal that people didn't always name it for what it was, a stimulant used to reshape the body and the day. And normal things can be the hardest to see clearly. If you grew up in a home where your mother always seemed busy, always cleaning, always moving, always a little tired but unable to rest, this story might suddenly feel familiar. If you grew up in a home where weight was discussed like destiny, where diets were seasonal like weather, where the scale was treated like a judge, this story might feel personal. History is not only wars and presidents and inventions. History is also the small rituals people repeat every day. A pail with coffee, a glance at the mirror, a quiet decision to be less hungry. When we talk about this era, we don't have to turn it into a scandal. We can treat it as a lesson in how culture and medicine can intertwine, how a drug can become a social tool, how a prescription can carry unspoken expectations. We can also treat it as a reminder to ask better questions. Not only is this effective, but at what cost? Not only can this make me smaller, but why do I believe I must be smaller to deserve respect? Not only what does this drug do, but what is my life asking me to endure that makes this drug feel necessary? Those are not easy questions. They are quieter than advertisements. They take longer than a prescription, but they are the kind of questions that help us avoid repeating history. And if you're listening to this as a bedtime story, if you've let the words wash over you like late-night radio, then let the ending be gentle. You are not a project. You are not a number. You do not have to be chemically sharpened to be worthy. The mothers of the 1960s deserved support and rest and honesty, not just appetite suppressants. And we deserve the same. If you'd like, leave a comment with the family or cultural rituals around dieting you remember. No judgment, just history. And if you want another slow story from the odd corners of everyday life, I'll be here. For now, close the medicine cabinet. Let the house go dark, and let your body return to its own quiet rhythm.